Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is life illuminated. By Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan. Acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians, a Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology, look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
And welcome back to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller with you, and a return guest, Senator Jim Carlson. And a few things I have to tell you about Jim Carlson. Number one, it's rare, I think probably this is the first time we've had a guest on in 2 consecutive months. And the reason, not only because there's a lot doing politically, but we had a guest who was forced to cancel at the last minute, and Jim was available and agreed to come in here, so we appreciate that. Number two,
Thank you, Alan.
the people who elected Jim Carlson to the Senate really got a bargain. Because I just spent a week with Jim in Mexico, our families together in Mexico, and the man never stops working for the district. He is on his phone constantly. He is going over papers constantly. He is writing constantly. So we really got time and a half out of him, and I don't think he enjoyed the vacation at all. I hope that his wife did, but Mexico was great. Would you know?
Well, to some degree, yes. And what you're identifying, Alan, is I have a time management problem. I can't get, put in all the things that I need to do and want to do. And, you know that I'm always one of these people that sticks into my last appointment until my next appointment is probably 5 minutes late.
Yeah.
So it is a problem where I really push myself pretty hard.
And one of the reasons, of course, that you're pushing even harder is because you haven't had a legislative assistant of late.
That's right, yes.
And you might tell us that story.
Well, we had I had a legislative assistant until the second week of June, and there was a hiring freeze imposed on a Friday of the second week of June. And over the weekend, my legislative assistant got a job that he couldn't refuse, working for a congressional candidate for the next election. And it would allow him to live at home in Mankato. So the dust hardly settled from this hiring freeze, and he was gone. And I don't blame him at all. It was something that's really good for him. It's the kind of thing that he liked. However,
It left you with nobody.
Right, and this hiring freeze didn't have an end date imposed, and it's still going on until now, January 6th. And I have someone identified, but I just need to get them hired, but they can't start until the 6th of January. So everything that's happening now.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what a legislative assistant does that you have had to pick up on and do?
Well, the first thing is that they handle all of your appointments and your calendar. I've always said that my legislative assistant is the person to contact if you want to get on my calendar, because normally I'm talking on my calendar when I'm on my cell phone, but otherwise the legislative assistants know a lot more about the legislature calendar and other things that have come up or are being talked about, and so they can fit it all in. And the next thing is that almost everything changes. And so you sometimes need to have someone who can follow up on all the schedule changes and contact the originator and get a schedule changed. Plus, they're the ones that handle a lot of the constituent issues that come up. So when someone asks about open enrollment in high schools, or about publishing ACT scores, or about child abuse, all of those, I generally turn the research over to my LA, and they do the basic research on it. And those are things, I'm telling you, these are real things that came up in the last week.
And these are real things that take a lot of time.
Yes.
And they fall to you because you don't have an LA.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, and I like to write a lot of these people personally, but that takes a lot of time to write responses. And I've taken it that if I don't do it right away, it might not get done. So
And
that's
you've
why I
had the
stop right away.
reputation of answering every phone call and responding to every letter.
I try to, yes, yeah. I mean, we do have filters for our email system, and the email that you have, that you showed on the screen now, that's my email that goes around the filters. So that's an email that we protect a little bit. I do give it out, but it's not the one that would be published in the newspaper or on the Senate website. Because as soon as you publish one of those, then there are people that are, I should say, there are entities that contact you. And like what you were talking about last week, when I came home, I had 2,100 emails that came in between Tuesday of the week before last and Friday on one subject. It was a robot that had done this. And we were trying to get them shut down so that they wouldn't fill up my email. And I'm not
So
going to
they-
answer all of those.
So they filled up your email.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, one of the things, all of a sudden, it came up in Mexico, and Jim Carlson said, uh-oh, Bach is being challenged for the leadership in the Senate. Now, Tom Bach has been a strong and very powerful, if not controversial, Senate minority leader for some time, a majority leader for a short time, but a minority leader. And suddenly his number two stepped forward to challenge him in a leadership position. Where is that today, a week later?
Well, as you may remember, there was supposedly a caucus that was called to get ready for, just at this stage of the approach to the 2020 session. That was going to be last Tuesday. And as you mentioned, the number two spot, which is Susan Kent from Woodbury, she thought that maybe she would be the leader for the next election. There are a lot of the senators who think we maybe should go a little bit more digitally, and also maybe be a little more clear on our positions. And then there's some positions that Senator Bach may be a little bit different than the rest of the caucus, for instance, on gun safety and a few
Well,
issues
he's from
like
the
that.
Iron Range,
Yeah.
and as we know, Democrats in the Iron Range generally have different priorities
Right.
than the Democrats down in the cities and the suburbs.
Well, we always say you're never in danger if you vote like a ranger. So yes, so the different priorities are there. They tend to be libertarians, and they are absolutely dedicated to the Iron Range. And sometimes that doesn't leave room for very many other issues. And I'm hoping that we're going to have, if she has the votes to do it, that we have a pretty reasonable accommodation. Tom is a very good negotiator. He is very strong. He has a lot of contacts.
He's also raised a lot of money for the Democratic
He's raised
Party.
a lot of money, yes. And so that, I talked with Senator Kent on Wednesday night, and this was at a fundraiser that was in the east side of St. Paul, and she asked me, do you have fears, Jim? And I said, right down to my toenails, because our number one issue in 2020 is to get the majority back so that we can get things done.
And that has been a big problem
It
this
has.
past year, because even though you're only 2 votes shy, at one point it was 1 vote shy, now
Correct.
it's 2 votes shy, the leader has such control, as we have seen federally with what Mitch McConnell can do in the U.S. Senate. Well, it's no different in the Minnesota Senate.
Yes.
And it can stop legislation from getting to the floor.
And that might be one of the reasons why Senator Kent wants to challenge Senator Bach, because we had those 2 elections that came up, special elections, and the one would have been pretty tough for us, but the other one we should have won, because it was a Democratic senator who went to be a commissioner, and that person should have been replaced by a Democratic senator. And that would have made all the difference in the world. And what we've been experiencing now is that very few of us have been able to get any of our bills heard. And that's a very recent and new attitude.
When you say very few of us, talking about Democratic senators.
Democratic
Yeah.
senators in our caucus, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have not had a bill heard in 2 years.
So that tells you something about stonewalling.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the Democrats have ever done that. They haven't when I've been there. We've heard Republican bills, I mean, there are some that you don't hear, but still, we have not been that polarized in the 11 years that I've been in the Senate.
Now, I read this week something about a climate change caucus.
Yes.
What is that? Where did it come from? And why is it so long overdue?
Well, we're looking at, if you talk to any young person, that is often their number one issue. And they're not happy that the older people are not looking for solutions. And they're seeing some of the latest information, for instance, on the melting of the ice caps and things like that. And so we thought we should form something like that, and hopefully we can attract some bipartisan support. But we think that it's imperative that we do something. And there's a lot of reason to do it, because the weather patterns have changed. Soon there's going to be a lot of coastal issues that are going to come to the head. And
Minnesota may be a coastal state.
potentially, but and by the way, we've been a coastal state at one time. You just look at our fossil records. But so there's a need for us to have a cohesive message on climate change, and that goes for both parties. And my thought is, we didn't talk about this at the press conference we had, but my thought is that we need to get the economic voice out there, because already we have, the military is working on Arctic routes to get to to Asia and even Europe. The insurance companies are not insuring a lot of Miami properties now because they flood with the tide. There's a lot of other.
It's a year after year after
Right.
year thing. They
Yep.
have the same thing in New Jersey. They have the same thing
Yep.
in some of the other coastal states.
And some of the Miami properties are flooded, every day. And so there's a lot of insurance companies now that are starting to recognize that they cannot take that risk anymore. And also they can't take the risk on some of the coastal areas. We've had these major hurricanes that are depressions, and that causes the sea level to come up and go right on land.
One state, and I don't remember which one it was, just passed some legislation that an insurance company has to give a year's notice. They just can't unilaterally send out a cancellation, but they have to give a year's notice. Mm-hmm. And I know that the insurance industry is very upset with that, but people who are the beneficiaries of insurance and who pay for it
Right.
need at least that. so that they can't suddenly find themselves in wetlands without insurance.
Right, and that same thing is happening for the same reason to farm crops. That farmers are now recognizing that crop insurance is getting more expensive, and not only because we're having more frequent large events, but also the predictions, or it's difficult to predict what the growing season is going to be because we have these unusual events. So that's why when I look at it, this is a business issue. It's something to save a lot of, if we can mitigate the climate change problems, it's going to save us some money. It's not going to save us, it's never going to go away. And what we need to do is just not make it worse. And the things that are making it worse
may save
now,
lives as well.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
No question about that in my mind.
Yeah.
And
just for people's interest, when you have an iceberg and it melts, that doesn't change the water level around the world at all, because ice is lighter than water. It sticks up, and when it melts, then it becomes water and occupies the same space. But when you have the glaciers in Greenland melting, which they're melting billions of gallons a day going into the oceans, that makes the water rise. Now that's cold water, but sooner or later that cold water will become warmed, and when everybody knows that warm water is bigger than cold water, so that raises the oceans around the world.
well, not only that, but it is really affecting fishing.
Yes.
And habitat for fish. Lobster fishing is now moving north to Canada from really Maine and places like that, simply because the lobsters can't live in the water that's there now where they've lived for centuries. So,
And that goes for some of the reefs as well. Some of the coral can't live in warm water. It can't live in acidic water. And our oceans are getting more acidic as time goes on too. Then we have the problem of the tundra up in the northern Canada and northern Alaska, where when that warms, it releases the methane that's already in the ground and being captured by the frozen soils. And when that gets released, that's going to cause a chain reaction of even more global warming.
and more air pollution as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's...
It's not cows.
Yeah, right. And it's a serious issue that if we don't get a handle on it, we'll have to adapt to a lot of it. But if we don't get a handle on it, it's going to happen faster. And right now, the scientists are saying it's happening far faster than what we had predicted.
Well, we're sitting here on Friday the 13th, a very momentous day in 2019, when the House Judiciary Committee just voted for an impeachment of the president.
Yes.
Professor David Schultz, who was interviewed earlier, said that Minnesota has become a target state, that we have more congressional offices that are being challenged here than ever before, that the Democrats only won by a small margin. And he talked about the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and 8th congressional districts, among others, plus the presidency. And he said we can expect $100 to $150 million of political money is going to be dumped in this state, with a lot of misinformation, such as a full-page ad that appeared in today's Star Tribune that is really not only misinformation, but it's deceptive and it's really antagonistic in terms of offending your intelligence. But a lot of people who haven't been paying a lot of attention get misled by just that, and it proves its worth to the people who advertised and paid for it. So how do you see that as affecting us going into 2020?
We have to do as much as we can to help people use their critical thinking. When they see something that it just doesn't make sense, that they dig into it and find out why it didn't make sense at their their first grasp. And that's tough. It's very hard when people are not paying attention. And that is our problem. We need to make sure that people have a reason to pay attention and do their due diligence to find out, who do I share values with? And, regardless of party, do I share values with that candidate? And then if you share a lot of them, we're never going to share 100%. I always say that. My wife and I have been married for 50 years, and we don't always agree, very rarely agree. And so you don't have to agree with a candidate 100% to be compatible with that candidate. And the second thing is if there's something that you don't like about that candidate, get involved in their campaign so that you can be close to that candidate and affect their decisions.
If anything defeats the Democrats in this upcoming presidential election, it will be the fact that people have to understand that nobody is 100% in lockstep with you. Unlike the Republicans, who don't seem to care. They take their marching orders in the morning from Fox News or wherever they get them, and then they are unified behind a man who I think has been the worst president in history.
Well, you were saying before we came in here that you watch Fox News once in a while, and and I've watched some of it. I don't really need to watch a lot because I do get a lot of the same kind of misinformation from either my contact with some constituents or in my email, that sort of thing. But we do have to hear the other side on a lot of these kinds of issues. And when they don't agree, just don't pick the one that you've always agreed with. Pick, hey, I need more information, and find out.
Or try to get a dialogue going, which has been more and more difficult this year. But so we can expect a rather hectic, brutal, and costly election here in this state.
Oh yes, and there's some things, there's a lot of things that affect it. One of them being that, will Amy Klobuchar come to the top? Will she be the endorsed candidate for the Democratic Party? Now, she has
really
won.
Surprisingly, this week in Iowa,
Yeah.
she zoomed 9 points
Yes.
from where she was, which is really astounding.
It
But,
is.
yeah.
It's very, and I'd vote for any of them, but I liked Kamala Harris from California, and when she dropped out, the other candidates were just scrambling to get her supporters, and I think Amy has picked up a lot of them.
Well, Amy has run, and she got a lot of criticism, has run a very intelligent campaign.
Yes.
And, it's a case where the tortoise may end up beating the hare. And she is pragmatic.
Yes.
She is not what I would call a bomb thrower.
And she's consistent.
And she's consistent, and she's very practical, in addition to being very well informed, intelligent, and having a great sense of humor. So it was very encouraging to see that. And I think this upcoming debate in the next week or so will even be more telling, as they got down to 7 or 8 candidates now. We don't have that parade of 20 candidates or 23 candidates, whatever it is.
Well, Senator Klobuchar has worked hard for those margins she's got across the state, and and she has terrific margins. She's won every congressional district, so there's something there that people like, and I think they like that consistency. They like the moderation
and the honesty. I
And the
really
honesty,
think the
yes.
honesty really makes a difference. Yeah, and back to the state, we have a budget surplus. And
Forecasted budget surplus.
A forecasted surplus. I immediately heard from the people on the right, let's give it back to the people. Explain really the genesis of a forecasted surplus and why we have to be careful so we don't end up with a Jesse Ventura
Yes.
situation of giving the money back and then finding ourselves in a deficit.
Yes, I've had people write me and say, hey, give it back like Jesse did. But they've forgotten that when Jesse had the Jesse checks, that put us in a 10-year slump, that we have had continuing budget deficits. And so now we have had surpluses for quite some time. And we always have to remember that surpluses are caused by a better economic situation. It's not by overtaxing, because we had the revenues predicted and the budget was based on those predicted revenues. We also had passed a law a few years ago where the November forecast, we have two forecasts, one in November, one in February. The November forecast is like a, hey, where are we at right now? And if we have a forecasted surplus, that 30% of that forecasted surplus gets directed into the reserve account, and that's the rating day fund. In February, we have a repeat of the forecast, and that's what they base the new budget on, or the supplemental budget. That's based on that February forecast. But in all of these forecasted surpluses or forecasted deficits, they are all not really effective until the 30th of June in the
following year.
odd-numbered year.
Yeah.
Odd-numbered year. So we're
And their projections
yes,
also.
they're projections. So we are right now spending in the 2020 budget. It's the name of the budget, or the name of the year is the year when it ends. So this fiscal year ends in 2020. The next one ends in 2021, and we have a biennial budget. So that forecast surplus that we see, that's targeted for June 30th of 2021. Now, you don't go running out and spending that at this point.
And we can't. And
Right.
you know, there are several topics that I wanted to get to you, and I just glanced at the clock, and I'm amazed that we only have a minute and a half left. So I want you to come back in either March or April and talk about the census, to talk about the importance of the census for us, the importance of registering every high school senior, and really how that can affect Minnesota, even to the point where if population swings, we might get an extra
Yes,
congressperson.
a
But
ninth
if it goes
congressperson.
the other way, we could lose one. So that very important topic, which we're not going to get to, and any last thoughts?
Oh, lots of last thoughts, but expressing them, I'm hoping that we will get the issue fixed on Diffley Road for children that have to cross Diffley Road. I'm working on that quite hard, quite strongly. I'm working on that. That was something that we had been working on for years, and I think now we're at those
Took
places.
a tragedy to get us there. but,
Unfortunately,
yeah.
I don't like to relate to the tragedy because it sounds like I'm capitalizing on it, and I don't want to do that. But we're going to get
Senator
Diffley
Jim
Center.
Carlson, thank you, and you're going to have to come back.
Okay, will do. Thanks. Any